The funeral had just ended and the whole family gathered in the lawyer's office. As Mr. Lawson prepared to read the will, my eldest son Mark suddenly snatched the papers from his hands and shouted, "Don't bother reading it. Everyone knows Mom left everything to me. That old man has no rights anymore." In front of the entire family, he tore the will apart. The shredded pieces scattered across the polished wooden floor, white and cold as blades cutting into my chest. Emily burst into tears. The relatives froze in shock. I clenched my fists so hard my knuckles bled, swallowing the fury that burned in my chest. Deep inside, I knew this was only the beginning of a war that would change everything. Before we continue with the story, make sure to hit that subscribe button, share your thoughts in the comments, and never miss the next chapter. When people see me now, they just see an old man in a black suit. Someone who lost his wife after 40 years of marriage. But before all this grief, before the funeral flowers wilted and the whispers about inheritance began, I was a builder. My hands laid bricks, lifted beams, and shaped homes across this town. My name is Richard Walker, 67 years old. My wife Margaret was my partner in everything. She managed the books while I worked long shifts on construction sites. Together we built not just a business, but a life, a home, a family. We raised 2 children, Mark our eldest and Emily our youngest. Emily became a nurse, compassionate, responsible, and always grounded. Mark was different. He was bright as a boy, charming even. But as the years went on, his ambition twisted into something darker. Mark always thought the world owed him. When he turned 16, Margaret and I scraped together money to help him buy his first car. I remember the way he smiled, promising he'd get a part-time job to cover the payments. But within months, the car was repossessed. He never paid a cent. Later, we tried to support him through college. Margaret picked up extra shifts at the diner, and I took on weekend construction jobs. We funneled everything into his tuition, but instead of lectures and textbooks, Mark found casinos and card tables. He dropped out by sophomore year, coming home with excuses that piled higher than the bills he left behind. By contrast, Emily worked through school on scholarships, part-time jobs, and pure determination. She never asked for more than we could give. She became a nurse because she said she wanted to help people like Mom and Dad. That's just who she was. Margaret worried about Mark constantly. She believed in him maybe more than I did. I saw the look in her eyes whenever he came asking for just a little loan to get back on his feet. She'd search my face silently, pleading with me to give in. And more often than not, I did. I gave him money to cover credit card debt, to refinance another car, even to catch up on a mortgage he never should have signed in the first place. Every time he promised me it would be the last. Every time it wasn't. But no matter how reckless Mark became, Margaret held on to hope. She used to tell me he's still our son. Maybe one day he'll change. Then came the illness. Margaret's cancer diagnosis shifted everything. Nights at home turned into nights in hospital rooms. Emily was there every step, holding her mother's hand, learning medical terms just to comfort us both. Mark was usually absent. When he did appear, he seemed more concerned about financial documents than his mother's pain. One evening, while the machines beeped steadily beside her bed, Margaret pulled me close. Her voice was weak, but her eyes were sharp as ever. "Richard," she whispered, "don't let Mark destroy everything we built. If he can't respect family while I'm alive, what do you think he'll do when I'm gone?" I wanted to argue to defend my son, but I couldn't, because I knew she was right. After Margaret's words that night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the stiff hospital chair, listening to the hum of the machines and her uneven breathing, wondering how a father was supposed to protect his family from his own son. Emily stayed with us almost every night. She brought soup from home, massaged Margaret's hands, and studied her charts like a second nurse. When Margaret was in pain, it was Emily who calmed her. When I broke down, it was Emily who steadied me. And Mark, he'd appear when he needed something. Sometimes it was a ride, sometimes money, sometimes just to check on the life insurance papers. He always left quickly, never lingering by his mother's side the way Emily did. After Margaret passed, the house felt like a hollow shell. Every corner carried her memory, the smell of her cooking, the sound of her laughter, but none of it could fill the silence she left behind. Emily moved in with me for a while, trying to keep me company. Mark rarely called unless it was about money. He once stood in my kitchen, leaning against the counter Margaret had chosen years ago, and said, "Dad, you don't need all this space. You should just sign the house over to me and Emily can figure herself out." The audacity. Emily had been the one cooking my meals, keeping me alive through grief, yet Mark wanted to strip her of any security. I didn't answer him then. I just stared at the cracked tile under my feet, remembering how Margaret had begged me not to let this happen. When Mr. Lawson, our lawyer, set the meeting to read Margaret's will, I knew trouble was coming. Mark had been circling like a vulture, asking when the will would be read, what assets were included, whether Mom left anything just for him. Emily, on the other hand, never asked. She simply told me, "Dad, whatever Mom decided, I trust it was fair." That's who Emily was, steady, loyal, respectful. And Mark. He was already convinced the world owed him the fruits of someone else's labor. Walking into the lawyer's office that day, I felt a storm brewing in my chest. Margaret's absence sat like a stone in my gut, and yet I had to hold myself together for Emily, for my grandson, even for Mark, though he didn't deserve it. The office smelled faintly of leather and old books. The polished oak table gleamed under the light, and on it sat the folder that held Margaret's final words. Mr. Lawson adjusted his glasses, ready to begin. Emily reached for my hand. My heart thudded, and then it happened. Before Lawson could utter a word, Mark lunged forward, snatched the papers, and tore them apart as if they were nothing but junk mail. The sound of ripping paper echoed in that quiet office like thunder. Emily screamed, "Mark, what are you doing?" Relatives gasped, some covering their mouths, others shaking their heads in disbelief. As the pieces fluttered to the floor, something inside me snapped. My knuckles tightened until they burned. Fury roared through me, not just at his disrespect for his mother's will, but for every sacrifice Margaret and I had made to raise him. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about inheritance. This was about whether I would let Mark trample over Margaret's memory, over Emily's loyalty, over everything we had built as a family. And deep down, I knew I couldn't let that happen. I didn't start as a man with assets to defend. I started with calluses and a promise. My father came home with a factory whistle still ringing in his bones. My mother hemmed dresses in a kitchen that smelled like starch and onions. When I married Margaret, we swore our kids wouldn't wear winters as thin as ours. So I built framing in summer heat, roofing in winter wind, while she turned envelopes of cash into bills that stayed paid. We bought our first house with coins in a jar and a pen that left a notch in my hand. The paint flaked, the roof leaked, and we loved it because it was ours. Mark arrived in a flannel blanket, Emily 3 years later with hair that stood like static. We had noisy good years. One cheap trip to Disneyland on Margaret's tip money, 5 rides on Space Mountain because a small boy believed I could hold up the sky. That sound, his laughter in the dark, felt like the reason for everything. At 16, I found Mark a battered Ford with my overtime. At 16, Emily bought a used Honda with babysitting money. It looked like 2 victories. It was really a fork in the road we didn't see. Mark charmed, Emily steadied. In the garage, I built a small workbench with Mark from leftover 2x4s and taught him the level, how the bubble finds center when you stop shaking. He grinned at the fix. I thought the bench would hold us steady. College was supposed to straighten him out. Overtime for me, diner shifts for Margaret, but classes gave way to card tables. Excuses stacked higher than bills. By sophomore year, the registrar knew him by absence. We called what we did next help. It wasn't. It was underwriting. First a car he couldn't keep, gone by Christmas. Then a house he couldn't carry, refinanced on my name, lost on my credit. Love is not a word big enough to cover the damage of the wrong kind of rescue. And yet the boy still showed up, sometimes fixing a hinge, kissing his mother's forehead, making Emily laugh until she snorted and then laughed at that. Hope is noisy. It masked the slide. One midnight he said, "Dad, I need 10 grand by morning," and I opened a drawer meant for house repairs and made it a drawer for panic. Knowing better and doing better are cousins who don't always speak. Then Margaret got sick. Not thunder, a quiet knock we didn't want to answer. Tests, waiting, the sentence you feel in your teeth. Emily learned the ward like a second home. I learned the sound of linoleum at 3 a.m. Margaret kept humor until humor left first hospital socks. She called runway shoes the morphine button, the polite doorbell. Mark visited in bursts, a bouquet with a grocery sticker still on. 10 minutes in a chair, 6 glances at his phone, soft promises to do better. Once while she slept, he leaned close and whispered, "Dad, where's the key to the box at the bank?" The monitor answered for me, steady, unimpressed. For a second his face cracked, embarrassment maybe, then the mask. On a night when the machine sounded like rain, Margaret pulled me close, skin-thin eyes not. "Richard," she said, Protect what we built. If everything passes through Mark, it will vanish, and he'll call it fate. Put my share somewhere safe so it serves the future, not the noise. She didn't ask for jargon. She asked for a plan. Choose someone steady to help. You keep the say-so while you're here. And when you come find me, let the rest land with the child who still listens when you teach him how a level finds center. Between treatments, we met Mr. Lawson. He translated her wish into plain steps with dates. No pressure. Transparent and boring, he said. 2 good words. Margaret nodded and made me promise a small, impossible thing. Paint that porch post. Promises in hospital rooms are tiny and true. There were 2 bright days in the gray. At home, she pressed her palm to the unpainted post. "That's going to look nice," she said. And in the garage, I handed our grandson the level Margaret once wrapped as a joke. "How does it work?" he asked. "The bubble finds center when you stop shaking," I said. He nodded with Margaret's seriousness in Mark's eyes. We built a crooked birdhouse and loved it because it was ours. The night before she died, Margaret gripped my hand harder than her arm could explain. "Promise me," she said. "Protect the house, the work, the savings. Protect Emily from being the parent. Protect our grandson from learning that love is a blank check." "I promise," I said, because there was no other honest sentence left. After the funeral, the house echoed. Emily made soup. I ate 3 spoonfuls. Mark called and texted, "When's the reading? Mom hated court. Let's keep it in the family." He was right about one thing: she did hate court. That's why she left us a plan that would only need a stamp. Lawson set the meeting. Emily laid out my black suit, and the tie Margaret said made my eyes look kind. The knot took 4 tries. Hands remember long after hearts forget. On the way, I parked by the church for 5 minutes of quiet I didn't earn and took anyway. "Measure twice," I told the man in the window. "Cut once, and this time cut true." Those warm, aching memories held me for one last breath, and then reality arrived with a sound I'll never forget, paper ripping like it was my heart. Cut to the lawyer's office, Mark's hand tearing the will. The sound of tearing paper kept ringing long after the scraps lay still on the oak. I put both hands flat on the table to keep my heart from jumping through them. My son stood over his mother's will, like a man who had split the sea with his bare hands and expected someone to cheer. "It doesn't matter," Mark said, breathing hard, hunting faces for applause. "Mom wanted it all with me. Dad's tired. Emily is a nurse, not a manager. I'm the only one who can handle the estate." Emily's voice cracked and then found itself. "You've handled cars into repossession and houses into foreclosure. You won't handle Mom." Mr. Lawson, calm as a metronome, smoothed a page. "Mark, what you tore was a courtesy copy. The real one is already on file. And to be clear, your father keeps full say over his half while he's alive. Your mother asked that her half be saved for your son when he's grown in a way no one can skim or gamble." The words didn't shout. They settled. Mark blinked. "Saved. For my kid. Not me." "That's what she asked," Lawson said. Mark's chin lifted, but his eyes flickered. The mask slipped for half a second. Doubt. Shame. He pinched a hangnail until it bled, then tugged the mask back on. He faced me. "You promised you'd never abandon me. This feels like abandonment." "I promised to love you," I said quietly. "I didn't promise to fund you." He laughed without humor. "Mom wouldn't have made a plan like that. You and Emily talked her into it. Your mother asked for protection." "Not applause," Emily said. Mark stared at Lawson. "Undo it. It's valid and it's already working," Lawson answered. Mark's shoulders tight-wired. "This isn't over." He slammed the door hard enough to rattle the blinds. Silence reassembled itself. Lawson turned to me. "From here on, document everything. If he pressures you to sign anything, don't meet him alone. Entitlement makes people reckless." I nodded. Under the table, Emily's hand found mine and stayed. That night, the phone lit up. Mark turned the charm up like a dimmer switch. "We got off on the wrong foot," he said. "Let's fix optics. I've got a notary tomorrow. We'll do one paper so I can make moves for you and a quick deed, streamline everything. You won't have to lift a finger." "You brought a notary to a boundary," I said. "There's nothing to sign." He sighed like a disappointed teacher. "Then I'll ask a judge if you're still fit to decide. Younger caretakers win these all the time. Emily can cry on cue. You can try to manage me," I said, "but we're managing the plan." He hung up. Seconds later, photos of pre-filled forms, a mobile notary's card, a message about doing this clean. At 2 a.m., another ping, a photo of my garage door half open, a close-up of the wall panel that hides my safe edge's pride. Keys or code in the morning, your choice. Anger sprinted up my throat. Shame held the ladder. I put the phone face down and breathed until the room stopped spinning. By noon the next day, a black SUV rolled into my driveway. Out hopped a notary flipping his seal like a coin, and two of Mark's friends in witness faces. Mark didn't knock. He tried the handle. The deadbolt held. I opened the door an inch with the screen between us. He smiled like a salesman practicing in a mirror. This is adulting Dad. We sign the control paper and the deed, stabilize things, and you relax. You keep calling theft a favor, I said. Emily stood behind me with her phone. You're on camera. Keep your hands to yourself. He dropped the act. Sign for me like you used to, one last time. I won't sign you a shortcut, I said. If you want trust, build it. The legal kind is already placed. He yanked the screen. The metal complained. A deputy rounded the walkway, voice level. Afternoon. We got a call about a disturbance. Everyone all right? The notary lifted his hands. Happy to leave. The friends shuffled back. For a heartbeat, Mark's shoulders sagged. His eyes fell to the porch boards. I don't want to be this guy, he muttered, too soft for the deputy, loud enough for me. Emily's foot moved forward on instinct. He felt it and put the mask back on. See you in court? He said, like Mercy hadn't just tried the door. The deputy handed me a simple form. If he comes back without invitation, then sign this and call. We'll handle it. It felt ugly and necessary. 2 days later, he tried the church parking lot, our softest ground. He cornered me near the hedges. If you loved me, you wouldn't humiliate me, he hissed. I won't trade your mother's memory for your comfort, I said. That's not love. Emily appeared at my side, voice steady. File what you want. We'll bring Dad's doctor's note and the plan papers and the police report. This is called accountability. He took a half step back. Not fear, just the absence of an audience. That afternoon, the school called. My grandson's mother had filed a report. Mark had waited outside pickup and offered a brand new bike if the boy could find our garage code, a secret game. The air thinned. We gave the principal our notes and saved her voicemail for Lawson. The school put Mark on the do not contact list. When I told Emily, she leaned on the counter and stared at the tile. He's pulling a child toward the safe, she said. He's not even pretending it's about family anymore. Patterns matter, Lawson said over the phone. Keep stacking them in daylight. The next morning, the bank manager called. Mr. Walker, your son is here with a paper he says lets him move money for you. Before we do anything, I'm calling you. I didn't sign that, I said. I won't. Her voice lowered. Come by if you can. When we arrived, Mark had the notary parked at a side table like a prop. He slid the form halfway across the wood. Sign this and I'll take care of everything. You can rest. I didn't touch it. The manager approached it with a polite smile that wasn't friendly. Mr. Walker, we've added a clear note on your account. No big moves without you here in person, and large transfers need 2 yeses. Sir, she turned to Mark, if you try again, under a disputed paper, security will escort you out. Mark laughed without humor. You people worship paper. We respect clarity, she said. It keeps families from becoming crime scenes. Security walked the notary out. The manager printed a 1-page note. Alert added, customer present. She slid it to me. Take a photo, she said, for your files. On the drive back, my phone buzzed with a different kind of trouble. Concrete truck canceled, the dispatcher said. Someone called saying there was new management. I parked at the job site. The crew stood with hands in pockets waiting. I called the dispatcher with the speaker on and let him hear my voice steady. Same management. Send the truck. He hesitated. Emily texted him the vendor letter Lawson had drafted. Only take instructions in writing from Richard or his counsel. The driver rolled up 20 minutes later and the hole in the ground became a foundation by noon. Not because I yelled, because paper outwalked rumor. That evening, a knock that wasn't a neighbor. Adult Protective Services, the woman said, showing a badge that didn't need a shine. We received an anonymous report about possible financial coercion. Emily opened the door wide. She gave a tour like a nurse, charting a room pantry full meds, organized appointments on the fridge bills, on auto-pay new locks with receipts on the counter. I showed the ring clips, the school note, the bank printout. The caseworker's eyes softened. Unfounded, she said gently. We see a lot of anonymous when a parent finally sets a boundary. If he pressures you again, call us. Exploitation isn't just money, it's fear. Mark shifted to reputation. He posted on Facebook that I was confused, that Emily was manipulative, that Lawson was predatory. He tagged cousins 2 states away. Comments piled up until Mrs. Jensen posted a photo from our porch, my grandson painting the post captioned, "This family builds. That's all I know." The thread turned. Truth has longer legs. I wish I could say I didn't waver. I did. In the garage alone, I stared at the pry marks on the safe panel and felt 20 years of rescues rising like a reflex. "Just sign," the old voice said. "One last time." I reached for the phone, then saw Margaret's level on the bench. I set it down and watched the bubble find center when my hand stopped shaking. The lesson I kept giving my grandson returned to me like a borrowed tool: find center before you trust what you've built. Mark wasn't done. He came back with smaller cuts, the kind you don't notice until you're bleeding. He called 2 of my subcontractors and told them payments were under review, spooking them into holding back a check. He changed the lock on the storage unit gate and told the manager I'd authorized a new system. She called me. "Policy says no without you here," she said. "My gut says no too." I thanked her and wrote down the time, the camera number, the name on her badge. It felt tedious. It felt like rebar. At the end of a long week, I saw him at the hardware store of all places, standing in the aisle like a man trying to remember the name of a tool. He pretended not to see me. I pretended to believe him. When he did glance over, his face slipped for a second, the blank shine gone, the boy who once asked how hammers knew when to stop peeking through. He looked away first. That night the text returned short, splintered. "You made me do this. Emily wins everything. Mom wouldn't pick her." Then a curveball. "What if I just had the house for 6 months? I could flip it and pay you back double." I stood at the sink and let the nonsense run down the drain with the suds. "He's bargaining with a door that's already locked," Emily said from the table, "and he's mad at the lock for being a lock." We sat together and rewrote the week in plain lines on a yellow pad. Tore the paper, tried to charm, tried to scare, showed up with a notary, church parking lot, school pickup, bribe, bank stunt, contractor calls, anonymous report, Facebook smear. At the bottom we wrote the only line that mattered: "We're still standing." He called again near midnight, voice stretched thin. "You made me the bad guy," he said. "Everyone's laughing at me. I didn't make you anything I said. I told the truth and turned on the lights. You can come through the door when you're ready to do the same. You think you won," he said. "I think we stopped losing." Silence on the line. In it, I could hear him breathe, hear a lighter click, hear a man decide whether to hang up angry or stay a second too long with his own thoughts. He stayed a second too long. "I don't know how to start," he said so low I almost missed it. "Start where it hurts," I said. "Call the bank you're dodging. Take a shift you don't want. Show up for your kid on time and without an angle. That's work you can do today." He didn't slam the call. He let it die on its own. Progress sometimes sounds like not hanging up. By then the house felt different. Not safer exactly, trouble still knew the address, but steadier, like a frame that had stopped flexing. Mrs. Jensen texted from across the street. "I'm on porch patrol. Casseroles on your steps." The school emailed to confirm their report and the do not contact list. The bank manager sent a follow-up. "Your note is in our training deck. Clear and simple. Wins." The deputy's card stayed by the phone. The storage manager left a voicemail. "Camera caught someone tugging at your unit late. We warned them off and filed a note." The week ended with no grand scene, just a house that held. I stood in the garage and traced the pry mark with a fingertip, then the clean edge of the level with a thumb. Enough, I said to nobody and exactly to someone. I called Lawson on speaker. He's escalated from paper to pressure to stunts. "I'm done reacting," Good Lawson said. "Tomorrow we stop arguing and start fixing. Simple steps that hold. We'll put the house under the family plan with your name to run it while you're alive. We'll tell every supplier that only you and I give instructions in writing. At the bank, big moves will need 2 yeses and old shortcuts get shut. The storage gets a new lock and a camera note. Then I'll send a short letter to the court that says in plain words what we did. No drama, just daylight." Emily looked at me over her mug. "No signatures," she said softly. "Only structure." For the first time in weeks, I slept brief, unbroken. At first light, we chose the only antidote to chaos we built. The wind at the cemetery lifted the corner of Margaret's note like it wanted to read along. I set a small rose against her name and said mostly to the trees I kept building long after the house was done, adding rooms for excuses. Emily slipped her arm through mine and didn't rush me. We stood until my breathing matched the branches. On the walk back to the truck, the silence between us wasn't empty. It was a decision we hadn't said out loud yet. From the cemetery to our front door, the kitchen turned into the room where we reset the rules for the future. We ate the way grief teaches you slowly, with the clink of spoons for a metronome. "He'll say I'm choosing sides," I told Emily. She didn't flinch. "You are," she said. "You're choosing the side Mom asked you to." I pulled Margaret's folder. "If something happens," from the drawer and set it on the table we used for spelling tests and taxes. Emily slid a legal pad in front of me, already titled "What We Keep, What We Let Go." I printed the first line to steady my hand. House keep. Business keep. Accounts secure. Under let go. I wrote guilt that looks like generosity and felt something unclench. Emily read it, nodded, and added, explanations that sound like apologies. We didn't raise our voices. We raised our standards. The kettle clicked off. Small, final, useful. Decisions sometimes sound like that. We made tea we didn't really want because ordinary tasks keep panic from using your hands. He'll try the same tricks, Emily said, drying 2 bowls. Guilt, pity, urgency. He'll say, "Sign for me like you used to, one last time." Then we'll answer the way we didn't used to, I said. No signatures, only structure. I stuck a yellow tab on the folder Lawson 10 a.m. The tab looked ridiculous and necessary at once. After dishes, I stepped onto the porch with my phone face down beside me and the timer clicking the light on like Margaret had programmed years ago. I told myself I was just getting air. I was waiting. Finally, I turned the phone over and dialed. He answered on the second ring. No hello, just the sound of a lighter, a drag, an exhale. "What?" "I wanted to say this once without a crowd," I said. "I love you. That won't change. What will change is how love looks. It won't look like signatures anymore. It won't look like me standing between you and consequences." He gave a jagged little laugh. "You promised you'd never abandon me. This feels like abandonment." I kept my voice level. "I promised not to surrender you. There's a difference. Abandonment is walking away. Boundaries are staying and telling the truth." The lighter clicked again. When he spoke, the volume had dropped, the honesty had inched forward. "I don't know what to do without a bailout." I pictured him on a dark step somewhere, the kind of night that smells like old plans. "Start small," I said. "Call the bank you've been dodging. Pick up a shift you don't want. Show up for your son on time and without an angle. That's a hand up you give yourself." He let the quiet run long enough for thinking to start. "You done?" "I am," I said. "But the door you come through next time has a sign on it. It says, 'Come in right.'" He didn't slam the call. He let it die on its own. Progress sometimes sounds like not hanging up in a rage. Inside, Emily had left the folder where we'd placed it centered like a compass. We added 2 more lines to the pad before bed. Keep dignity with documentation. Let go, being liked by people who need our silence. I walked the hall once, touching the pencil marks on the doorframe where we'd measured the kids over the years. Small proofs that growth happens even when you're not watching. In the garage, I tugged the pegboard level with 2 fingers. The bubble settled between its marks when my hand stopped shaking. That was the lesson I kept giving my grandson and forgetting to give myself. Find center before you trust what you've built. Back in the bedroom, I sat on the edge of the mattress and let the house talk to me, the heater's tired cough, the ice maker's small hail, the refrigerator's patient hum. Grief is loud in the afternoon and quiet at 3 a.m. Boundaries are the opposite. They announce themselves in daylight and then hold through the night. I thought about Margaret's runway socks and the way she'd say, "Do the boring, brave thing." I thought about how many times I'd confused rescuing with loving. Rescuing had turned into underwriting. Love would have to turn into stewardship. The difference is, who carries the weight? Emily knocked once on my doorframe. "You all right? Getting there?" I said. She leaned on the jamb like a nurse who knows when to leave and when to stay. "He'll call it betrayal," she said. "He'll call it a lot of things. We can't control the name he gives it," I said. "Only the shape we build." She smiled, tired and sure. "Then let's build." She kissed my temple the way Margaret used to and went down the hall. I lay back and stared at the ceiling I'd painted 10 summers ago, the spot where a roller had dripped and we never noticed until the light hit it just so. Imperfections don't ruin a room. Pretending they aren't there does. For the first time in weeks, sleep found me without a bargain. Not long, not deep enough. I woke before dawn to the kind of quiet that feels earned and brewed coffee that didn't taste like regret. On the table, the folder weighted the yellow tab, bright as a small flag. The list read like a blueprint now, instead of a wish. House, business, accounts, keep, secure, let go. The porch light clicked off with the timer. The sky took a breath. Emily came in with 2 mugs and her keys. Ready, she asked. I looked around at the ordinary at the chair with one wobble I'd fixed this weekend, at the photo of our first house with its flaking paint, at the sticky hand toy our grandson had left wedged behind the bread box like a neon reminder that the future is already in the room. Ready, I said. Grief had taught me how to hold on. That morning reflection taught me what to release, the fantasy that love means preventing every bruise, the habit of confusing peace with silence, the reflex that signs because it's easier than saying no. What I kept was smaller and sturdier, a kitchen table with a plan on it, a daughter who would not let me apologize for doing the right thing, and a promise I'd made in a hospital room to the woman who knew the difference between saving and keeping. We locked the front door not to keep the world out, but to keep the structure in. And as the sun lifted over the maple, we did the only thing that stands up to chaos. We took the folder and we drove to build. Morning came clean for the first time in weeks. I brewed coffee that didn't taste like regret, tucked Margaret's folder under my arm, and met Emily at the truck. No signatures, she said, as a reminder, not a question, only structure. We drove to Lawson's office and built exactly that. House first, Lawson said. He slid a 1-page form across the desk. This puts the house under your family plan with your name to run it while you're alive. I'll send it to the county the moment you sign. Anyone trying a fast one with this address runs into a wall. I signed in blue ink. The notary stamped. Lawson clicked submit and said, "Done. Business next." He typed a short message that went to every supplier and crew lead. Nothing's changing. Only take instructions in writing from Richard or me. He CC'd the lumberyard and the 2 subcontractors Mark had rattled. One replied before we stood up, "Copy that, Richard." At the bank, we met the manager who had called yesterday. "We're going to keep this simple," she said. She split the money into 2 clear buckets, day-to-day and savings, and turned on one easy rule: any big move needs 2 approvals. She also removed old shortcuts I'd let Mark talk me into years ago. We signed the new cards. She shook my hand like a man who'd seen too many families arrive a week too late. At the storage unit, the manager cut off the tampered lock under a camera's red dot. We took pictures, made a list of what mattered, and installed a new lock registered to my name under the family plan. She punched the time into her tablet the way a nurse charts a dose, dated boring exact. By lunch, Lawson had pressed send on everything that mattered and emailed a short note to the court clerk in plain words. "The plan is in place. Here's what we did." He looked up. "Transparent and boring," he said. "That's how storms pass." I felt it in my ribs, the quiet that follows a frame finally braced right. The house wasn't louder. It was truer. "Last piece," Lawson added. "Rumor fills a vacuum. Let's invite the family to hear the plan once clearly with seats for dignity." He drafted an invite titled, "Family Review Plan and Intent, Friday at 3. Attendance optional." He CC'd my brother, my sister, and Mark on purpose. "He won't refuse an audience," I said. "He never has," Lawson replied. "Our audience will be facts." The next 2 days looked like work, not war. Emily scanned decades of receipts into neat folders. I called crews with the same sentence on repeat: same hands, same work. The school emailed to confirm the do not contact note. The bank sent a line I read twice just to feel it. Alert added, "Customer present." Mrs. Jensen texted a photo of a casserole on our steps with porch patrol still active. Nothing dramatic, just neighbors and paper doing what noise can't. Friday arrived smelling like coffee and printer ink. The conference room had a long table and short patience for gossip. My sister brought a box of tissues. My brother brought his habit of nodding when a point lands. Emily sat to my right. Mark came 5 minutes late with a new jacket and yesterday's grudge. Lawson stood. "This is a review, not a debate," he said. "We'll keep it simple." He clicked to a single slide with 3 lines. "Richard keeps full say over his half while he's alive. Margaret's half is saved for the grandson when he's grown." The house and accounts are set up the way Margaret asked. He showed dates receipts, the bank's two-approval rule. He spoke like a carpenter reading a cut list, calm, precise, no flourishes. Mark interrupted. You puppet-mastered Mom. Lawson didn't blink. She signed calm, not cornered. She asked for guardrails while she could still see the road. Emily leaned in. Mom asked us to protect what she built. We're doing that. Mark shifted to me. You promised you wouldn't abandon me. I promised to love you, I said. I didn't promise to fund you. For a second, his face cleared like a storm breaking, just enough to show the sky. Then he picked the clouds again. Undo it. It's already working, Lawson said. And there's one more thing that may help you hear your mother instead of us. He dimmed the lights and pressed play. Margaret filled the screen in afternoon gold thinner and the cheeks steady in the eyes. Hello, love, she said to the camera like it was my face. If you're watching this, we did the boring, brave things. Good. She took a breath that sounded like work done right. Richard keeps control while he's alive. No one pressures him to sign anything. When he joins me, what remains goes to our grandson. Not to punish, not to reward, just to protect what was too hard to earn to gamble away. She paused, then added, Mark, if you're in the room, I love you. Loving you doesn't mean paying for your worst choices. If you're angry, be angry at the mirror, not at your father. The room held still. My sister dabbed her eyes. My brother nodded. Emily's hand found mine under the table and squeezed once. Across from us, Mark's jaw moved like he was chewing gravel. His eyes went glassy, then hard, then lost. Lawson stopped the video. Questions he asked, not unkindly. Mark stood. He looked at me, then at Emily, then at the blank screen where his mother had just spoken. You think you're saints, he said, but there wasn't heat in it, only the kind of tired that comes after sprinting in the wrong direction. He turned to go, then paused with his hand on the handle as if the door weighed something it hadn't before. I don't know where to start, he said, too quiet for anyone but our row. Start small, I said. Tell the truth, then keep telling it. He nodded once barely and left without slamming the door. In our family, that counts as progress. We signed the meeting notes, simple names on simple lines. Lawson gathered the copies. I'll file this summary and the video transcript today, he said. It's not a sword, it's a lantern. Outside, the light hit the bricks. The way light hits things that were built square. On the drive home, Emily asked, Do you think he hurt her? I watched the road. Hearing is slow, I said. We built it so it has a chance. That night there were no knocks. The ring showed a cat, a moth. Mrs. Jensen waving her phone like a lighthouse from across the street. The house breathed like a house should, timbers, settling heater, coughing a kitchen light, humming over a clean table. I slept. Not long. Enough. In the morning, Lawson's email waited. County recorded the house form. Vendors acknowledged the message. Bank settings live. Family meeting filed. 4 lines heavy as beams. People think turning points come with fireworks. Sometimes they come with a steady pen, a neighbor, and watch a video from a good woman in a family choosing paper over panic. We hadn't won anything. We had stopped losing. Next came the part no one claps for, and everyone depends on keeping it that way. The judge didn't want speeches. She wanted facts. Lawson stood. Half stays with Richard while he's alive. The rest is saved for the grandson when he's grown. The house and money are set the way Margaret asked. Bills are paid. The judge flipped through our packet, nodded once. Looks clear. If anyone pushes against this, the court won't be patient. One light tap of the gavel. Done. In the hallway, Mark took a call. 2 more weeks, he told someone. I'm fixing it. He stared at a half-typed, I'm sorry. Dad then deleted it letter by letter. When he looked up, his face had the blank shine people wear when they pick anger over shame because it hurts less in public. Outside, the sidewalk turned into a small stage. Neighbors held up phones. A young reporter jogged over. Mr. Walker, did your son try to take your house? My wife left us a plan. We followed it. That's the story. She turned to Mark. Sir, do you want to respond? The word sorry hovered and couldn't land. No comment, he said, and stepped back. By night, the clip had more views than our town has people. Comments split Team Dad. He's still your son. Boundaries. Love elder. Abuse. At home, we did ordinary things. Put tools away, returned a crew call. Then I opened the fireproof envelope Margaret had labeled open only after the court is satisfied. Inside, a savings certificate she'd renewed quietly for 20 years. The deed to our first little house, and a letter in her neat hand. Richard, if you're holding this, the plan worked. Now, do the next good ordinary thing. Take the savings and the old house and put them where they can teach hands to build. Not to punish anyone, not to reward anyone, just to keep a promise to the future. In plain words, when the court was satisfied, we'd move those two things to the local trade school as a starter fund. Emily would oversee it. One firm line, no payout to any adult who fought or harassed the plan. The station ran a follow-up Grandmother's Name Fund's apprenticeship program. They filmed my grandson tracing Margaret Walker Apprenticeship Fund on a brass plate. At the edge of the crowd, Mark stood with his hands in his pockets. He took one step toward us, stopped and stared at the words, "Learn to build." The camera lost him in the bodies. The comments doubled. That evening he knocked empty-handed. No notary, no forms, just a man tired of acting. "I saw the order," he said. "Judge made it clear." "She did," I said. "I keep meaning to fix it," he added, and I knew he didn't mean the porch post. "I just don't know where to start." "Start where it hurts and tell the truth," I said. "Call the bank. Take a shift you don't want. Show up for your son on time and without an angle." He nodded. "Once the smallest concession a man can make without calling it that. Tell him I'll call when I'm ready to see him right. Do the work," I said. Not a sermon, a fact. He left without spinning gravel. We ate at the kitchen table Margaret loved. No victory speech, just quiet done right. I slipped her letter behind our photo in front of the flaking paint house and stood still long enough for gratitude to catch up. People will ask how we won. We didn't, not the way headlines like. We filed what was true, kept our tempers turned, money into a tool instead of a leash, and let a good woman's plan outlive her. Boundaries didn't shout, they held. If this ending felt fair to you, drop a yes in your city in the comments. If you think the extra assets should have gone straight to the grandson instead of the apprenticeship fund, comment no and tell us why. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Thank you for watching.